The night air was thick with silence, the kind that settled into the bones and made the world feel impossibly still. The only sound was the hum of Laura Davis's tires on the deserted highway, a lonely rhythm in the darkness. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, glancing at the empty road stretching out before her. Her mind was still replaying the argument she'd had with her father earlier that evening, a fight over trivial things that seemed so insignificant now. But she wouldn't let it go. Stubbornness was her nature after all. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught her eye. A deer darted out onto the road, its eyes wide and reflective in her headlights. Laura's reflexes kicked in, but too late. She swerved hard, the car jerking violently to the side. Tires screeched, metal groaned, and the world spun into a blur of shadows and sparks. The last thing she remembered was the sickening crunch as the car crashed into the ditch and everything went black. When Laura came to, pain radiated through her body like 1,000 needles. She blinked, trying to focus, but all she could see was a haze of smoke and flickering flames. Panic surged, and she struggled against the seatbelt, but her left arm was pinned. Tears stung her eyes as fear choked her. She was trapped. Then, through the blur, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in dark combat gear, a faceless silhouette. Laura's heart raced. Who was this man? "Stay still. I'm getting you out of here," a deep voice commanded, calm and steady despite the chaos. "No, don't," she croaked, fear mixing with the pain. But the man didn't hesitate. He shattered the glass with a swift, practiced motion and reached in, strong hands working to free her. She flinched at his touch, her mind racing with irrational fear. Why would someone like him help her? With a grunt of effort, he lifted her out just as the car erupted into flames behind them. Laura gasped, the heat searing her skin as the man carried her away, his grip firm but gentle. He set her down carefully on the ground, his face still hidden in the shadows. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But he didn't answer. Instead, he glanced back at the burning wreckage, his gaze distant, haunted. Then he turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving her alone with a heart full of confusion and a mind teeming with questions. The stranger who had saved her life? Who was he? And why did he look so familiar? Laura's eyes flutter shut as sirens wail in the distance, the answer lingering just out of reach. The beeping of medical monitors was the first thing Laura heard when she woke up. Blinding white lights overhead made her squint, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils. Confused, she tried to move, only to be met with a sharp pain shooting through her arm. Her body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. "You're awake!" A nurse appeared beside her bed, smiling warmly. "You're in the hospital, Miss Davis. You were in a car accident." "Accident?" Laura murmured, the memory of screeching tires and blinding headlights flashing before her eyes. And then, him, the man who had pulled her from the wreckage. Her heartbeat quickened. "The man? Where is he?" The nurse's expression shifted slightly. "The man who saved you? He stayed until the paramedics arrived. You're very lucky, Miss Davis. He managed to get you out just in time." Laura closed her eyes, trying to piece together the fragmented images. "Who is he? Did he say his name?" The nurse shook her head. "No, he left before we could get any details. But you were conscious when they brought you in. You kept asking him not to leave." Heat crept up Laura's neck. What must she have looked like? Bloody, broken, pleading for a stranger to stay. A stranger whose face she hadn't even seen. Her father's voice boomed from the doorway. "Laura!" Colonel Davis strode into the room, worry etched into his features. His graying hair was disheveled, his usual composure cracked. "Thank God, you're awake." "Dad," Laura breathed, relief flooding her. But his presence brought a new urgency. "The man who saved me, did you talk to him?" Her father stiffened. "No. The nurses said he was gone by the time they arrived." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "What did he look like?" Laura shook her head slowly. "I don't know. It was dark, and everything was happening so fast." Her voice trailed off as she remembered the broad shoulders, the steady grip, the strength in his arms. and the fleeting sense of familiarity that tugged at her even through the pain and confusion. Colonel Davis's jaw tightened. "Did he say anything to you? Anything at all?" "Just—" "He told me to stay calm, that he was getting me out of there." A strange expression flickered across her father's face. Anger, fear, something else she couldn't quite place. "Well, whoever he was, I'm grateful. But it's over now. You need to focus on getting better." Laura narrowed her eyes. Something was off. Her father wasn't just relieved, he was agitated. She had seen him in life-and-death situations before. Calm under pressure was his hallmark. Why was he so rattled now? He looked like— She hesitated, trying to recall the details. He was tall, big, African-American, I think. I couldn't see his face. The color drained from her father's face. "What? Dad, what is it? Do you know him?" "No," he said sharply, too quickly. "No, of course not. Just forget about him, Laura. He's not important." But as he turned away, she saw the way his hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white with tension. Something inside her twisted. Her father was lying. Laura watched her father's rigid back as he left the room, suspicion gnawing at her gut. Who was the man who had saved her life, and why was her father so desperate for her to forget him? 2 days later, Laura was discharged from the hospital with her arm in a cast and a head full of unanswered questions. Her father had hovered over her like a hawk, deflecting every attempt she made to bring up the mysterious stranger. It wasn't like him to avoid things, especially when it involved his daughter's safety. The morning after her release, Laura found herself standing outside her father's office, nerves buzzing. She took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," his voice barked from the other side. She stepped inside and found him behind his desk, surrounded by the trappings of his military career. Medals, certificates, a framed photo of him in uniform with a group of soldiers, one of whom caught her eye. She squinted, leaning closer. The soldier was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in combat gear, his face serious, eyes intense. "Dad, who is this?" she asked quietly, pointing to the photo. Colonel Davis looked up, his gaze darting to the picture. For a second, a flash of something— guilt? Pain? Crossed his face. Then his expression hardened. "No one you need to worry about." Laura's temper flared. "I have a right to know. This man saved my life, and you're acting like it's some kind of secret. Why?" He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You're overthinking it, Laura. He's just a soldier I served with years ago. What's his name?" "Let it go, Laura." "No, I won't," she snapped, startling herself with the force of her own anger. "Why won't you just tell me?" Her father's eyes blazed. "Because you're asking the wrong questions," he roared, his face reddening. "You don't know what you're getting into. Just leave it alone." The silence that followed was deafening. Laura took a step back, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father like this, so unhinged, so afraid. "Dad?" she whispered, shaken. "What did he do?" Colonel Davis closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was low, strained. "He didn't do anything. I did." Laura blinked. "What?" He turned away, his shoulders slumping. "You want to know the truth? Fine. He was the best soldier I ever served with. He saved my life more times than I can count, and I repaid him by ruining his career." Shock rippled through her. "What? Why?" Her father didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn outside. "Because I was weak," he said finally, the words heavy with regret, "and I let other people's hate cloud my judgment." The room spun. Laura stumbled back, clutching the edge of the desk for support. "You mean, you—" "Yes." His voice was barely a whisper now. "I betrayed him, and I've regretted it every day since." Laura stood there, her world unraveling. The man who saved her life was the same one her father had destroyed, and now she was determined to find him, no matter what it took. This builds the intrigue and emotional tension, laying the groundwork for a complex narrative that delves into themes of redemption, prejudice, and the consequences of choices. Finding the man who had saved her proved to be more difficult than Laura anticipated. The hospital had no record of his identity, and there were no photographs or videos, just a blur of conflicting eyewitness accounts. Her father remained tight-lipped, refusing to divulge anything else despite her relentless probing. But Laura was nothing if not determined. Sitting in the corner of a bustling cafe, she scrolled through yet another page of search results on her laptop. Local hero saves woman from car crash. Mystery man disappears after rescue. The articles were all the same. Brief mentions of a heroic figure and speculation about his identity. But no name, no face. Then she saw it, a small, grainy photograph buried at the bottom of a news site. A silhouette of a man standing beside the wreckage, his broad frame unmistakable even in the low-quality image. He wore military fatigues, his face obscured by the angle and shadows. But it was him. She knew it. Her breath caught. Below the photo was a caption. Former Marine reported to have left the scene before authorities could identify him. Sources say he may be local. Local? She muttered under her breath, heart racing. That was her first real lead. If he was local, there had to be a way to find him. With renewed determination, she began her search, combing through military records, veterans organizations, and social media groups dedicated to ex-servicemen. Days turned into weeks as she reached out to anyone and everyone who might have information, facing dead end after dead end. Finally, one rainy afternoon, she got a reply. The message was brief, just a few lines sent by someone who claimed to know her mystery hero. If you're looking for Mark Johnson, you can find him at the Veterans Center on 9th Street, but don't expect a warm welcome. Laura stared at the screen, pulse pounding. Mark Johnson. She had a name, and with it, a destination. The Veterans Center was a modest brick building tucked between a mechanic's shop and a small diner on a quiet street. It was the kind of place people passed without a second glance, unassuming, forgettable. But as Laura pushed open the heavy wooden door, she was struck by the palpable sense of history in the air. Faded photographs lined the walls, showing groups of men and women in uniform, their faces etched with pride and pain. A receptionist looked up as she entered, a polite smile on her face. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mark Johnson," Laura said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was told I might find him here." The woman's smile faltered slightly. "Mark doesn't usually see visitors." "Please," Laura insisted. "It's important." There was a long pause. Then, reluctantly, the receptionist nodded toward a door at the end of the hall. "He's in the back, but just be respectful, okay?" Laura swallowed hard and nodded. Her palms were sweaty as she made her way down the hallway, each step echoing loudly in the silence. What would she say to him? How could she even begin to explain why she was here? The door creaked open, and there he was. Mark sat at a small table, his back to her, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He was dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair cropped close to his scalp. Up close, he seemed even larger than she remembered. Broad shoulders, muscled arms, a presence that filled the room. She hesitated, her courage faltering. Mark Johnson?" she called softly. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Dark eyes locked onto hers, sharp and assessing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, recognition flickered in his gaze. "It's you," he said quietly. Laura's heart leapt into her throat. "Yes, it's me. I just wanted to thank you." His brow furrowed. "Thank me?" "For saving my life," she whispered. "I know it's been a while, but You shouldn't be here," he interrupted, his voice hard. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Whatever you're looking for, you're not going to find it." Laura blinked, taken aback. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," he snapped. "I did what anyone else would have done." "No, you didn't," she insisted, stepping forward. "You risked your life for a complete stranger, and I need to know why." Mark's jaw tightened. "Because it was the right thing to do." "That's it?" Laura demanded, frustration bubbling up. "You're not even going to let me thank you properly. After everything—" "You don't owe me anything," he cut her off, voice low and strained, "and I don't need your gratitude." The words stung. Laura opened her mouth to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. A flicker of pain, buried deep. This wasn't just about her. There was something else, something he wasn't saying. "Please," she said softly, "I just want to understand." Mark stared at her for a long moment, his gaze searching. Then, with a heavy sigh, he turned away, running a hand over his face. "What is there to understand?" he murmured, almost to himself. "You want a hero story? Some neat little ending where I get a medal and everyone claps? That's not how this works." Laura flinched. "No, You want to know why I saved you?" he continued, voice rising. "Because I've spent my whole life watching people like you look at me like I'm nothing. And in that moment, when I saw you trapped in that car, I thought, maybe I could prove them wrong. Maybe, just this once, I could show someone that I'm more than what they think I am." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "But it doesn't matter, does it? Because here you are, wanting to thank me like I'm some kind of charity case." "Stop," Laura whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "That's not what I—" "Then what do you want?" he demanded, eyes blazing. "An apology? A redemption arc? You're wasting your time, Miss Davis. Whatever you're looking for, it's not here." With that, he turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Laura standing alone, shaken and stunned. She watched him go, heart aching. She had found him, but instead of answers, she was left with even more questions. And one thing was clear. Mark Johnson was a man haunted by his past. A past she was determined to uncover, no matter what it took. Laura sat at her desk staring at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked steadily, mocking her. Days had passed since her confrontation with Mark, and the more she tried to forget his words, the deeper they burrowed into her mind. He wasn't just a stranger who saved her. He was someone who had been wronged, someone whose pain ran far deeper than she could comprehend. With a steadying breath, she started typing. Mark Johnson, former Marine. The search results flooded the screen, and she began scrolling, her eyes narrowing as she sifted through the articles, old reports, and vague references to his military service. One headline caught her attention. Sergeant Mark Johnson saves squad from certain death. She clicked on it, her heart pounding. The article detailed a harrowing mission deep in hostile territory. The squad had been ambushed, several men critically wounded, and Mark, against orders, had charged into the firefight to pull his comrades to safety. He'd single-handedly secured the perimeter until reinforcements arrived. For his actions, he'd been awarded the Bronze Star for valor. Her gaze lingered on his image. There he was, younger but unmistakably him, standing tall in his combat uniform, his expression solemn. This wasn't just any soldier. This was a hero, and her father had destroyed him. The thought made her stomach churn. Determined, Laura grabbed her phone and called the Veterans Center. After some insistence, the receptionist finally put her in touch with a former soldier named Tom, who had served with Mark. "Yeah, I remember Johnson," Tom said gruffly. "Good man, the best of us." "What happened to him?" Laura asked, bracing herself for the answer. There was a long pause. "They kicked him out," Tom said finally, bitterness seeping into his voice. "He was set up, blamed for something he didn't do. They needed a scapegoat, and he fit the bill." Laura swallowed hard. "Do you know who was responsible?" Another pause. "Your old man was in charge of the investigation, wasn't he?" Her heart plummeted. "Yes, but he wouldn't." "Wouldn't he?" Tom interrupted harshly. "Look, lady, your dad wasn't a bad officer, but he sure as hell didn't stand up for Johnson. Let them railroad him right out of the Corps. Some of us tried to help, but you know how it goes. Nobody listens to grunts like us." Laura hung up, her hands shaking. It couldn't be true. Her father, the man she'd looked up to all her life, had been part of a cover-up? Had destroyed an innocent man's career? She needed to hear it from him. Laura stormed into her father's office, her face pale, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and pain. "Dad, we need to talk." Colonel Davis looked up from his paperwork, his brow furrowing. "Laura, what? Did you ruin Mark Johnson's career?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The room fell silent. For a moment, her father just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze darkening. "Who told you about that?" he asked quietly. "That doesn't matter," Laura shot back. "I want to know the truth. Did you?" "Yes," he said flatly, cutting her off. "Yes, I did." Laura recoiled, as if struck. "Why?" she whispered, horror dawning on her face. "He was your friend. He saved your life." "I know." Colonel Davis's voice cracked and he rose to his feet, pacing furiously. "You think I don't know that? But I didn't have a choice. The higher-ups were breathing down my neck. They needed someone to take the fall. And he was what?" Laura cried, her voice rising. "Expendable? Easy to blame because of his skin color?" Colonel Davis froze. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in her life, Laura saw something break in him. "Yes," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Yes, that's exactly what it was." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She staggered back, tears blurring her vision. "How could you do that?" she choked out. "How could you betray him like that?" "I was scared," he said, his voice raw. "I was a coward. I thought, if I did what they wanted, I could protect my career, protect our family. But I was wrong, Laura. God, I was so wrong." Laura shook her head, unable to comprehend the enormity of it. "So you just let him be thrown away? Without a fight? Without even trying to clear his name?" "I tried. Later," Colonel Davis said desperately. "After I retired, I made some inquiries, tried to get him reinstated. But it was too late. They'd already destroyed him." "And you never told me," Laura whispered. "You never told me that you ruined the life of the man who saved me." "Because I couldn't bear for you to know," he said softly. "I couldn't bear for you to see me for what I am, a failure, a coward." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Laura stared at her father, the man she had admired and respected all her life, and saw a stranger who had traded another man's life for his own ambition. "You have to make it right," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You have to help me fix this." Colonel Davis looked up, his eyes haunted. "It's too late for that." "Then I'll do it myself," Laura whispered fiercely. "I'll find him. I'll clear his name. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving her father standing alone in his empty office, the weight of his sins pressing down on him. The next time Laura visited the Veterans Center, Mark wasn't there. She waited for hours, but he didn't show. Frustration clawed at her as the minutes dragged by, her resolve wavering. But she couldn't give up. Not now, not when she knew the truth. Finally, just as she was about to leave, she spotted him walking down the hallway, his expression guarded. He paused when he saw her, his gaze narrowing. "You again?" he muttered. "What do you want now?" "I want to help you," Laura said quietly. Mark snorted. "Help me? You?" "Yes," she insisted, stepping closer. "I know what happened. I know what my father did to you." For a moment, Mark just stared at her. Then he shook his head slowly, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "And what? You think you can fix it? That you can undo all the damage?" "No," Laura admitted, her voice soft. "But I can try. I can tell people the truth. I can help clear your name." Mark's expression hardened. "And why would I want that? What's the point? My career is over. My reputation is gone. Nothing you say or do can change that." "Maybe not," Laura whispered, "but you deserve justice. You deserve to have your story told." Mark looked away, his jaw clenched. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, finally, he sighed and turned back to her, his eyes weary. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Why do you even care?" "Because I owe you," Laura said simply, "and because I want to make it right." Mark stared at her, something shifting in his gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Fine," he said softly, "but don't expect it to be easy." Laura smiled through her tears. "I wouldn't expect anything less." They shook hands, a fragile alliance forming between them. Together, they would face the truth and all the painful consequences that came with it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of research meetings and late-night conversations. Laura and Mark spent countless hours poring over old military records, contacting former squad members, and gathering evidence to prove his innocence. It was exhausting, frustrating work, and there were moments when Laura thought Mark would walk away for good. But he didn't. Despite his skepticism, despite his anger, he stayed. Something in him refused to give up, even after all these years. One night, as they sat in Laura's small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups, Mark leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes wearily. "This isn't going to work," he muttered. "They covered their tracks too well. Even if we find something, who's going to listen?" "We'll make them listen," Laura said firmly. "We'll go public. Contact reporters, use social media. We'll tell your story, and we won't stop until people pay attention." Mark sighed, his gaze distant. "I used to think justice mattered, but after everything I've seen, I don't know if it even exists anymore." "It does," Laura whispered, "and we're going to find it." As they continued their search, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of Mark's old squad mates, a man named Rodriguez, came forward with a confession. He had seen the evidence being tampered with, the orders forged, and he'd kept copies, fearing for his own career if he ever spoke up. Laura and Mark met with him secretly, their hands shaking as they held the damning documents. "Why now?" Mark asked quietly, staring at the papers. Rodriguez shrugged, a sad smile on his lips. "Because I was a coward too, but I'm tired of running, and you deserve better than what they did to you." With Rodriguez's testimony and the newly uncovered evidence, they had everything they needed to go public. But Laura knew that wasn't enough. They needed a platform, something big enough to force the military to take notice. And that's when she made a decision that changed everything. The press conference was held in a small, nondescript building downtown, but the turnout was massive. Reporters, activists, and curious onlookers filled the room, cameras flashing as Laura took the stage beside Mark. She gripped the podium tightly, nerves thrumming through her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "Today, we're here to expose a grave injustice. A man who served his country with honor was betrayed by the very institution he dedicated his life to." She glanced at Mark, who stood stoically beside her, his face impassive. Taking a deep breath, she continued. "My father, Colonel Davis, led an investigation that framed an innocent man, Sergeant Mark Johnson, for a crime he didn't commit. For years, Mark has lived with the shame and the stigma of that false accusation, while the real criminals walked free." The room buzzed with shocked whispers, cameras clicking furiously. Laura held up the documents Rodriguez had given them, her heart pounding. "This is proof of that injustice. And today, we're demanding that the military clear Mark Johnson's name, restore his honor, and hold those responsible accountable." The press conference erupted into chaos as reporters shouted questions, their voices blending into a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. But Laura stood her ground, her gaze never wavering from Mark's. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly, so only he could hear, "for everything." Mark looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." The fallout was swift and brutal. The story spread like wildfire, splashed across headlines and social media feeds. Public outrage mounted, and under immense pressure, the military announced a formal inquiry into Mark's case. Colonel Davis was called to testify, his role in the cover-up laid bare for the world to see. Laura watched the proceedings from the back of the courtroom, her heart heavy. Her father looked older, smaller somehow, as he took the stand, his voice trembling as he admitted his guilt. The weight of his actions seemed to crush him, and by the time the hearing ended, he looked utterly defeated. Mark was there too, silent, watchful. As the verdict was announced, a murmur rippled through the room. "Dishonorable discharge rescinded. All charges against Sergeant Mark Johnson are hereby dropped. His record will be restored, and he will receive full honors." The crowd erupted into applause, but Mark remained still, his expression unreadable. Laura held her breath as he turned and walked toward her, his eyes dark and searching. "Mark," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "It's over. You're free." He nodded slowly, a small, weary smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," he murmured. "I guess I am." But Laura could see the pain still lingering in his eyes, the scars that no amount of justice could erase. She reached out, hesitating, then gently took his hand. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. Mark looked at her, his gaze steady. "I don't know. Maybe try to figure out who I am without all of this hanging over me." Laura smiled through her tears. "Whatever you decide, you'll have my support, always." For the first time in what felt like forever, Mark's smile reached his eyes. "Thank you, Laura, for everything." In the months that followed, Laura and Mark's story became a symbol of hope and redemption. The military issued a formal apology, and Colonel Davis quietly retired from public life, his career in tatters. But for Laura, the real victory was seeing Mark begin to heal. He started working with veterans organizations, using his story to advocate for those who had been wronged, fighting for reform and accountability. And as he did, Laura found herself by his side more and more, their unlikely friendship deepening into something stronger. One evening, as they stood on a rooftop overlooking the city, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Mark turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I used to think there was no such thing as a second chance," he murmured. "But you proved me wrong." Laura smiled softly. "You deserved it, Mark, and so much more." He looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Maybe it's time I started believing in hope again," he said quietly. Laura squeezed his hand gently. "And maybe it's time we both started believing in a future, together." For a moment, they stood there. The city spread out before them, the world full of possibilities. And, for the first time in a long time, they both felt something they thought they'd lost forever. Peace. Years later, Laura and Mark stood together at a dedication ceremony for the newly renamed Johnson Davis Veterans Center, a place where soldiers could find support, healing, and a path forward. As the crowd applauded, Laura glanced up at Mark, pride swelling in her chest. "We did it," she whispered. Mark smiled down at her, his eyes warm. "Yeah," he murmured. "We did." But as they stood there, surrounded by friends and supporters, Laura knew that this was only the beginning. Together, they had faced the past and found a way to heal. And now, they were ready to build a future, one filled with hope, redemption, and a love that had grown out of the ashes of pain. Because in the end, that's what true courage was. Not just surviving the storm, but finding the strength to rebuild after it passed. And they had found that strength in each other. If you enjoyed this powerful story of redemption, resilience, and hope, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with others who need a reminder that real change starts with courage and compassion. Subscribe to stay updated for more gripping narratives that challenge perspectives and ignite meaningful conversations. If you have thoughts, feedback, or want to discuss the themes in this story, drop a comment below. Let's keep the dialogue going. And remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change someone's life forever. Be the change.